afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland, and this the first full Scottish of 2026. My name is Brian Liddy and today we are joined by Broadcasting Scotland stalwarts William Duguid, and coming from Wales we have Hugh Marshall. Good afternoon to you both. I hope you're managing to stay warm during this rash of amber weather warnings we've been having of late.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Yes, thank you
We do have plenty of people in Wales.
Thank you for joining us, Hugh, from Wales. Apologies also for the late start. But on the programme this week, forgive me, I'm rereading the same bits. So we have today's Middle East update, as usual. As Israel continues air and artillery attacks on Gaza, at least 441 Palestinians have been killed and 1,223 Palestinians have been wounded since the Gaza ceasefire agreement came into force. Meanwhile, the world's attention has turned to events in Iran, it would seem. Hugh, if I can come to you first, the troubles in both Gaza and Iran have something in common, that being Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel. Is that something that needs to be flagged up more in the media? It's not something that the connections haven't really been unpacked, I don't think, very much. What do you say?
No, as you say, the focus is on the sort of the dissent perspective. But as you say, it's difficult to tell with Netanyahu. Because I think, again, that we've got Trump as the sort of main puppet master in all of this, because he's threatening to attack Iran if they kill protesters. Obviously, I was reading reports this morning that one hospital had at least 80 dead arrived. But I did find it quite ironic that you had Trump saying he was going to take action if Iran murdered protesters, when it looks like his own ICE agents are doing that to American citizens.
Thank you, Hugh. William, I thought that we would have been done with our routine Gaza updates when the ceasefire was first announced, but it would seem I was a bit naive when I thought that.
Well, I wouldn't wish to accuse you of naivety. I think we were all maybe a bit naive, but this is a ceasefire in name only in Gaza. There's still really a bombardment going on by the Israeli forces, by air, by artillery, by naval attacks still. And the numbers since the truce are horrendous. And I think it's hanging by a thread. What's also going on at the minute is that the weather conditions are bad. It's cold and it's very, very wet. There's been torrential rain. And of course, Israel has just effectively begun the process of banning 37 humanitarian aid organizations from even entering the territory, which is just going to exacerbate things. I think it's being done in a sort of basis of you need to have your papers right and we need to have a full staff list. But in fact, it's potentially compromising the safety of aid staff to do that, which is why the agencies don't want to do it. And if they don't comply, they'll be pulled out of there by March the 1st. And that will really make life difficult. It's already difficult for some aid folks to be getting in, particularly from Médecins Sans Frontières and also the Danish aid agency. They're claiming that they're being held back at the border. So it's not a good situation at all. There's a certain amount of both sidesing going on in the general media whenever there's something comes up that hits Israeli citizens. But really, it is still a bombardment, and there is no obvious end to it. And I think the real answer has to be, and it won't happen, but it has to be some sort of international humanitarian effort put in there in the middle of it to basically keep the sides apart while we can get some sort of constructive talks going forward about how they coexist in the same kind of space.
And just quickly, William, President Donald Trump threatened to have troops, boots on the ground in Iran if the government was to open fire on the civilians there. Do you think maybe you should make a similar offer to Israel?
I'm not sure I'm that keen on American boots on the ground at all, very much. I certainly don't want to see large-scale killings. I'd like that to stop immediately. But I do share Hugh's sense of irony about how Trump can be saying that with one side of his face and at the same time. Nicole Good isn't the first person to die at the hands of ICE, but certainly it's the most flagrant example of it. So a very, very troubled situation. And actually, the further away Trump is from it, I suspect, the better.
Thank you, William. And so today is the 1418th day of the war in Ukraine. And so I'm just going to pull up some headlines here for what's been happening in the war with Russia. So Russia hits Ukraine with rarely used Oreshnik missiles in fresh strikes. That was 2 days ago. 1 million hours have been spent, 1 million people have spent hours without heat and water after a Russian strikes, Ukraine has said. President Zelensky says he does not have clear security pledges from allies. And Zelensky has also replaced Ukraine's powerful security service chief. There's been missile attacks on Kharkiv, killing 2, including a child, authorities have said. And Russia has accused Ukraine of killing 27 people in the New Year attacks in occupied Kherson region. William, I think it's your turn to go first. What's your thoughts on the goings on in Ukraine? Still,
well, it's still going on. Very heavy Russian bombardment, but we're hearing about all the damage to the civilian infrastructure, etc. And I know there's a certain amount of tit for tatting going on, but there isn't really much progress being made. Under it all, Russia isn't progressing quickly. And this is all the hallmarks, if it's not stopped, of being bogged down for months and years to come. So there needs to be progress with the 20-point peace plan, if it's a goer, and it may not be a goer because, of course, Russia still has to say yes to it. Russia actually has an interest in just carrying on and keeping things as they are while it can re-strengthen, because it's lost a lot of men. So that's why Russia is likely to be saying no to any such thing. But that needs to move forward, and we need to see something there. I know there's going to be a UN Security Council meeting tomorrow about the Oreshnik strike on Lviv, which is a clear breach of the UN Charter. I don't think anything will come out of that, but it may bring things back to the forefront again, because again, Ukraine is kind of slipping a wee bit out of the news with so much else going on in so many other places.
Thank you, William. Hugh, was there anything that you managed to pick out that you'd like to mention about from the Ukraine update today?
Ooh.
I'm not hearing anything, so I'm wondering if maybe we should move on to... Have we lost Hugh?
No, there we are. Sorry, it was on mute. Can you hear me now?
Hugh, I don't know if you managed to hear my question. It was really just to find...
Yeah, I did. So basically, I was just going to saying, last week that we had the was it the hypersonic or the supersonic missile used for the second time, and it's clear that Russia are targeting civilian infrastructure, that they're not just going after military targets, and it's ongoing. As William was saying, I think Russia, they're not making progress. That I read last week that they're actually losing ground in some areas. That they're struggling with troop numbers because so many people have died, and the troops they have, are very sort of demoralized and not very incentivized because they're not being fed properly or being clothed properly. So I think the longer it goes on, then that it is better for Ukraine. But I think the trouble is now is what Trump has done with Venezuela, what he's threatening to do with Greenland, is basically he's giving the green light to Russia to invade another country. And I think it comes back to the fact that Trump generally doesn't see Putin going into Ukraine as an aggressor as being a problem, because obviously he feels the same. If he wants something, he's just going to try and get it. So I think it's quite dangerous times at the moment. And I think the other thing, obviously, we've got the midterms coming up in November. I know we've only had Christmas now. We're not wishing the year away, but it's going to be here sooner rather than later. And if he does lose power over the Senate and the Congress, then he is going to be limited in what he can do. So my concern is what he's going to try and do in this period before November, and it looks like that he's spiralling out of control.
Thanks, Hugh. That brings us neatly on to our next item. So from regime change in Venezuela to threats against Cuba, Colombia and remarkably Greenland, President Trump, as you said, seems to be acting in a rather imperial manner. Hugh, you were meant to go first here, but as you were talking about the goings on in America, there, maybe I can offer this to William next. William, many in the media have been asking just what is driving President Trump's expansionist ambitions. I think one possible answer to that might be the notion of America's manifest destiny, but I haven't seen or heard any mention of it in the news. I don't know, are you aware of the idea of manifest destiny? And if you are, do you think there might be some truth to it?
Well, I don't know if manifest destiny is linked to what was known as the Monroe Doctrine, which Donald Trump has rechristened the Donroe Doctrine, which basically was the idea put out by President James Monroe in 1823 that was initially actually to defend Latin American countries against European colonial expansion, and to say, look, we'll look after this side of things, and in return we'll promise not to interfere in Europe. It was Roosevelt later on, at the turn of the 20th century, who actually turned it more into basically America rules the roost. And there's been at that time there were several interventions going on, and then FDR quietened things down a bit. But over the last 40 years, American interference in all sorts of things has gone pretty well through the roof, and under Trump, certainly. And the Donroe Doctrine, it seems to be that America now feels the right to throw its weight around and to see itself as one of three spheres of influence in the world. America with its bit, China with its bit, and of course Russia with its bit. And that is actually not a constructive way of looking at the world as it currently is. And in fact, it's a throwback to what we were seeing 100 plus years ago, and not a healthy thing whatsoever. So I think that's pretty much behind it. There are other things I suspect as well behind it, but I'm going to give Hugh a chance to talk about them.
Okay, thank you, William. Hugh, just in case people are wondering, the manifest destiny was, you're right, William, it is connected to the Monroe Doctrine. Manifest destiny was the 19th century belief that the United States was destined to expand its territory across North America. And it was just that therefore justified a sense of divine right and American exceptionalism. The ideology played a significant role in the country's westward expansion, and was used to justify the annexation of territories like Texas and California. And it seems to me that Pat Kane yesterday talked about the global gangsterism of Donald Trump, and Jeremy Bowen now talks about Imperial America. And it seems to me that it just sounds like the modern day equivalent of manifest destiny. Is there anything to that, or is it just too arcane?
No, I agree completely, because when you look at manifest destiny, I think it was John O'Sullivan, the journalist, who came up with the term. It is basically what Project 2025 is. It's this belief that the Americans believe that God intended them to spread their Republican ideals and way of life. And as you mentioned, that it was used as a way of acquiring other places, because people forget that the United States wasn't just formed as sort of all the states that are there now. That they were sort of independent bits of land, and that they were sort of taken over from a governmental point of view. But it is because we have to remember that that before the Americans were there now, there were Native Americans and Mexicans there, and they were pushed out, and their lands were stolen, and their rights were trampled upon. And it's exactly what this Trump government is doing. But it's basically the core beliefs of it is this, and I think this is the key thing: is the American exceptionalism. You can see that the way that Trump talks, it is about how the US is unique and superior, because everything he talks about is in this weird, unique. Nobody's ever seen it before. Nobody has what we have. When he was describing the strikes with going in to take Maduro in Venezuela, the exceptionalism of US forces and how they do it, and obviously one of the other core beliefs was white nationalism, and it's the dominance of white Americans, and you can see now with what's happening with ICE in the USA, it is about basically targeting people on the basis of the colour of their skin. And driving them out. So it's gone from when you go back to the times where black people didn't have rights, but it seems to be the brown skinned people that he's going after now. But it won't stop there. It will go sort of full throttle. But I think what's interesting though is he was elected on this America First agenda, and the fact that he's going into these places, and the polling is showing that sort of his exploits into Venezuela and sort of internationally are very unpopular, and not just with Democrats but with Republicans as well. So it's something that he's doing that I think is actually damaging his base further, because obviously his popularity is tanking. But again, what's frightening though is listening to a YouGov poller from the United States on the radio last week, and they were saying that the Democrats are leading the Republicans, in the Senate and in the midterms coming up in November. But it was a very slim lead, and if it's a slim lead and this is what's happening, it does cause concern, especially with the gerrymandering and Trump's apparent love of claiming that everything is stolen and false, and he'll be doing his best to make sure that Republicans do well in November.
We're probably going to go over time on this item, but I think it's important that we stay with recent events in the US. 4 days ago in Minneapolis, Rennie Nicole-Wood, a civilian, was shot dead by a US Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer, otherwise known as an ICE officer. Chilling, to say the least. Rennie was shot in the face 3 times at point-blank range while seated in her car. She was unarmed. William, I don't know if you were aware that Rennie Woods was killed less than a mile away from where George Floyd was killed by a policeman. Floyd's death led to the Black Lives Matter movement. I was kind of hoping that Rennie's death would spark a similar movement, but that's 4 days now and there doesn't seem to be anything. Do you think that means that it's those who support the Second Amendment are simply going to carry on regardless and carry on supporting an American government that shoots its own citizens dead in the street?
Well, I would give it a wee bit of time with Rennie Good. She hasn't had her funeral yet, and that'll bring things to the fore. I think it has actually hit a lot of people in America to see it. Now it's. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but when it's brown people getting shot, somehow it doesn't have the same resonance, and it should. But this was basically a mother of 3 who offered no threat, and the film showed that Nicole Good offered no threat whatsoever. Even the film that the ICE agent himself recorded on his phone that was supposedly paraded as evidence that she had tried to run him over showed him nothing of the sort. There was a little disruption in the film, but that was just while he was transferring his phone from one hand to the other in order to draw his weapon. I think that will have a great resonance. And interestingly, you do see now some Republicans putting their heads above the parapet and saying, we're not having this. Some Republicans in Congress, people even like Marjorie Taylor Greene, that I thought had really drunk the Trump Kool-Aid, is certainly not a supporter of what Trump is getting up to at the moment. That said, it is a very, very dangerous time because the people who are protesting against Trump really have to keep their cool at the moment, and it's very difficult because there is clearly a threat to them now. Not long after Nicole Good was shot 3 times, in a separate incident, there was a member of the public photographing an ICE officer who came up to her and basically saying something along the lines of, didn't you people see what happened back there? And knocking the phone out of her hand. Basically, it's becoming almost a crime now to film ICE officers doing what they're doing. And the concern for me is, firstly, that it will spill over ultimately into more widespread violence, because it will be very difficult for people to keep their cool. But also, I'm wondering to what extent possibly the Trump administration is almost trying to foment this sort of violence on, a resistance that's violent, because that will give Trump an opportunity to summon up the Insurrection Act, and that puts the midterm elections actually in jeopardy. They could be cancelled as a result of that. Because as things stand, I think Trump is on the way to losing heavily. The Republicans are on their way to losing heavily in the midterm elections, and that will hobble Trump if both the Senate and Congress go to the Democrats. So I believe there may be something more sinister at play here, and I very much hope that the midterms take place, but I wouldn't absolutely bet on it.
William, I think you're right. I think it's important to note, and it struck me that the video footage, as you say, it showed that there were no reporters around. It's not like it was a flashpoint. There was no, if there was trouble in that street, then journalists and video crews would have gone there to report the happenings. It was just an ordinary suburb, people going about their daily business with mobile phones and the like, and I think that's important to say that this is just every day now happening in America. Hugh, the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, said that ICE should get the F out of Minneapolis, and I think it was J.D. Vance that said that for him to say that was inflammatory, but Frey made, I think, the classic counter, and he said his language was nowhere near as inflammatory as a government agent shooting an unarmed woman dead in the street at point blank range. What's your thoughts on what happened in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I think exactly what William was saying. They've released that footage of from the ICE officer who murdered Miss Good. And they thought it was going to sort of prove the case, but it's the counter. But it's weird that there's this false narrative, the fact that the White House and all those people, they just lie, consistently saying she was a domestic terrorist, that the ICE officer felt his life was at risk, that she was she's going to ram him and stuff. But the video showed that there was no sort of aggression from her. If anything, it was just the fact that she was being sarcastic and her wife was being sarcastic to them. That's what sort of pushed them over the edge, is they didn't like being belittled. And that's the scary thing. It's not a case of they're scared of violence. They don't like people being mean to them. And that's the worry. And there has been lots of protests across the states in the last sort of 48 hours, but with little trouble. I think there was some issues. I think there was 29 arrests at a hotel that was damaged in Minneapolis. But as you say, once the funeral comes along, there is, I think, a concern that, as William was saying, is that, they're trying to manufacture rage in order to cause disruption and try and sort of, stop the elections and stuff. But I think what's good is you got people like Senator Waltz, who was running as vice president, and the messages coming out of the Democratic and the sensible side of America is be peaceful, and don't sort of rise to the bait. So I think that's one positive, and I think that's a good thing. But it's really concerning, the fact that the Trump administration is saying, the ICE agents going to carry on doing their work. They're going door to door, And it is, it's the 1930s all over again. And we learned those lessons, and we thought we learned those lessons, and we wouldn't allow it to happen again. And it's happening in front of our very own eyes in the United States of America.
Thank you, Hugh. William, could you maybe just briefly say something about the disparity, the staggering disparity? But anybody who's seen any of the videos that have come out, and you see it with your own eyes unfolding, and then the outcome, and then you hear what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are saying about she was crazed and ran over the ICE officer and he's lucky to be alive. And how do you account for the different accounts in the same video footage?
This is part of the playbook, isn't it? You're not allowed to believe the evidence of your eyes. And the evidence of your eyes now can be a video that can be slowed down frame by frame to see a car preparing to pull away and then speeding up when it's trying to pull away, probably because Nicole Good has just seen the officer begin to draw his firearm and her wife is saying, drive, get out of here. But yeah, to say, first of all, he was run over is patently, there's nothing that looks even remotely like that. And it's unlikely, from what we've seen, that he even had any physical contact with the car whatsoever. But even if he did, it was basically no threat to him because she was trying to drive away. But nevertheless, when you tell a lie, you keep telling a lie and you tell the big lie. And eventually you get your way. This was what Joseph Goebbels did. This was his big theory about how you do things. And it's absolutely right. So you will see these huge disparities. And, they think ultimately they can get away with it. I think that actually bringing out the second video shot by the officer was an own goal, but they will use it and they will, even though it looks absurd, they will continue to say it because this is the classic way these things are done.
Do you think he will lose votes because of what seems like lies that he's been telling?
Yes. He will lose votes if there's a vote to be had, but that's the other one. There may not be.
Thank you, William. So Finance Secretary Shona Robeson will unveil the Scottish Government's 2026-2027 budget in the Scottish Parliament this coming Tuesday. The Scottish Government's budget is late this year because it cannot happen until after the UK budget has happened. So Scotland has to wait to find out how Westminster budget is going to impact us here in Scotland. And likewise in Wales, where you are, Hugh, Rachel Reeves' Westminster budget was delayed and only took place last November, and so here we are in January. William, there's a clear hierarchy in place here, isn't there? Shona Robeson's already said that her budget will be in stark contrast to that of Westminster's. But with so much speculation about budget shortfalls and calls for tax cuts and social security cuts from the opposition, how can Shona Robeson fund public services, pay doctors, keep the no tuition fees for students, cut child poverty, and still keep most people in Scotland paying less tax than the rest of the UK? How, just physically, is it possible, and do you think something is going to have to give?
Well, it's a juggling act. The Scottish Government does have to, and does, balance its budget every year, but every year there are tricky decisions to be made. I would have to say that I'm not a card-carrying SNP member, but I do approve very much of the way they have managed to progress on several fronts, despite having to do this juggling act, and it is a difficult one. The first thing is that although most people pay fewer tax, those with the broadest shoulders do tend to pay more tax in Scotland, and frequently the opposition will make a big thing about that. But there's two things to say there. The first is that, well, income tax is the only tool the government has got because it doesn't have control over any other form of taxation. And secondly, it's a question of what you get for the money, because what you get for the money is more in Scotland than you do in England. You get free prescriptions universally. Now, a lot of people get free prescriptions in England, but not by any means everybody. You get free tuition, which you certainly don't get in England. And you also get better subsidised public transport, and there are other things as well. But it's not just what you pay; it's what you get for the money. And I think there's a case to be made for the current distribution of taxation being maintained and maybe even slightly enhanced. The second approach that the Scottish Government would have is to be innovative in what it does. And for example, the Scottish NHS, I believe, is particularly innovative. Certainly my experience of it as opposed to the English one, which I previously had, is that it's always had to be more innovative because it's got less money to work with. But it's a difficult thing. I hope that she's able to keep the level of some payments up, particularly the Scottish Child Payment, which again is something fairly unique that she's managed, or her predecessors also have managed to carve out of the financial settlement. And that has made a difference. And that's the key, to keep making a difference, to keep things getting better. We're all still recovering from COVID and from financial issues within the UK over years, and it's a slow thing. But we are beginning to get there, and it's a question of whose narrative will eventually win out when it comes to the important thing, which is the election in 4 months' time.
So, William, I'm going to stick with you for a moment because you listed sort of SNP staples, the kind of thing that you hear the SNP repeat over and over and over and over again. The baby box, for example, is another one. You said free university tuition fees, falling child poverty. But do you think maybe we take all these things for granted and that we're going to lose some of these things because there is no money?
I don't think we're going to lose. I think they will stop any of these at their peril right now. They will do everything they can to make sure they can maintain them. And there may have to be things somewhere else that they do. I do think to a certain extent we do take them for granted because that's what happens when you've had something for many, many years and you don't actually recognise that elsewhere in the UK some of these things don't happen. I think the big danger is that somebody else is elected in May who will take them away. I don't necessarily think with the current polling figures that will happen, and we may speak about that shortly, but that to me would be the biggest threat. I don't think you'll see any of the headline things taken away in this budget, but there will be a juggling act nevertheless.
Okay, fingers crossed. So Hugh, when does the devolved government in Wales deliver its budget, and what do you think that might look like? Will it have anything in common with the Scottish budget, do you think?
Yeah, it's slightly different in Wales because obviously we've got less fiscal levers compared with Scotland. So I believe the budget, the final budget is published on the 20th of January, and then there's a vote a week after that. So obviously the discussion now is because Labour don't have a majority, is they're going to need either support from other parties or a substantial block of other parties abstaining in order to pass the measure. So in Wales, the budget, the actual budget for the next year is 27.6 billion, and that's an increase from the last year's budget of around 2%. So obviously with inflation as it is, it's not keeping up with inflation levels. So yeah, I think it's going to be challenging. One of the interesting narratives here is obviously we've got the Senedd elections and you've got the Holyrood elections coming up in May. A lot of people are saying, because basically Labour have been in power for 25 years, sort of backed by Plaid Cymru. But what people, don't seem to realise and they don't understand, and it hasn't been communicated, is the fact that Plaid Cymru have actually given sort of the Welsh government almost like their social conscience. They're the ones who've been pushing for free school meals and so with plans to try and help getting children out of poverty. Because unlike Scotland, where children in poverty is going down, it's going up in Wales, and it's predicted to go up to almost, I think, sort of 30%. 30-40% by the end of the decade. So it's slightly less of a talking point in Wales because obviously there's more of a limitation what they get money for and what they spend it on.
And so, Hugh, staying in with you in Wales, Westminster's giving the Welsh Government something like over £400 million to spend, and the Welsh Government can spend it on anything they like in any way that they want. It's also giving Scotland, by the same deal, £157 million, which is much less than Wales is getting. And also, the Scottish Government is not going to be allowed to spend it wherever it wants, and Westminster is going to decide where that money is going to be spent. Douglas Alexander said how Wales chooses to allocate that funding from the UK Government rightly and reasonably is a matter for the Welsh to decide. But he went on to say, in contrast, in Scotland, we are taking a different view. Is that something that you're aware of?
No, I wasn't aware of that, and that's quite sort of shocking, because it does show that they're giving a Labour government in Wales different treatment to the one in Scotland. But I think basically, one of the key things in Wales is even sort of Welsh Labour are saying that it wasn't enough. They're saying yes, it was a record thing. But as I say, it's about 2%. And although the Welsh governments can spend whatever they want, the vast majority of the sort of revenue and capital spend in Wales is on health and social care and housing and local government. That takes up a massive chunk. I think it's almost about 75% of the budget. So they're limited with what they can do, because obviously, health and social care in Wales are, compared to Scotland, a bit of a bin fire.
Thanks, you. And I should maybe make clear, that's not money, that's not the budget. These are like cash bungs that is separate, that are coming our way. Hugh, I wonder, do you think the difference between the way Westminster's treating Scotland and Wales, is Wales are they worried about Wales after the Caerphilly by-election, and maybe in Scotland the SNP lost a lot of MPs at the previous general election, so maybe they're thinking, we can do what we want. How would you account for the difference?
I don't think but the thing is, it wasn't enough of a difference, because after Caerphilly, Eluned Morgan, the First Minister, was on the phone to Keir Starmer on a Friday morning saying, we need, sort of help. The budget came out after that, and they didn't get anything like, that would make any real difference. So, from that point of view, I think to a certain extent, Starmer has given up on Wales in May, and it's just, I think they just realise it's a lost cause. And if they had thrown even more money, I think the concern is in Wales, and the reason Labour are losing support in Wales is their delivery of services with the funding they're getting just isn't good enough.
Thank you, Hugh. William, what do you think about Douglas Alexander's delivery about the difference between England and Wales?
Well, I'm not. Sorry, my voice seems to be going. Douglas Alexander is just playing politics, basically, and he's trying to belittle his political opponents, and that's really the long and the short of it. The money involved is not important. It's not a drop in the ocean, but it's not significant in the terms of the entirety of the budget. And the truth is that for both Wales and Scotland, for even proper devolution, I don't think the financial settlement is anything like adequate enough, and the amount of flexibility that each government has got is not adequate. Douglas Alexander knows that fine, of course, but he's quite comfortable with it, and indeed, I think, quite patronising in his attitudes. So, not a great fan, to be fair.
Okay, thank you, William. So, party leaders this week fired the starting pistol for the Holyrood 26 elections campaign this Monday. Broadcasting Scotland was able to attend the First Minister Swinney's speech in Glasgow on Monday, and it's clear that he is hoping to mobilise independent supporters to turn out and to vote SNP. So as we were there, here's what he had to say to Broadcasting Scotland's very own Catherine Nutt.
Can I come to Catherine Nutt of Broadcasting Scotland?
Hiya. So with cases of low voter turnout quite likely, how are the SNP going to realistically convince people to come out and vote?
We've got to motivate and mobilise people to come out and vote. It's going to be a combination of doorstep activity, of which my party is doing a significantly greater amount in the run-up to this election than it did in the run-up to the general election in 2024, and I'm very pleased with how much is going on around the country, but don't take that as any invitation to let up the pressure. We've got to maintain that very significant amount of activity, of engaging with the public, listening to the public, addressing the concerns of the public, setting out our ideas to the public, and also by the phenomenal digital reach of the SNP campaigning, which has been built up over many years and which is going to be intensified the closer we get to May the 7th. And fundamentally, those are the techniques that we will use to get us into a position of motivating and mobilising people to vote in the election. But there's also the ideas and the aspirations of the election campaign which lie at the heart of the election. And we, of course, offer people in Scotland hope because we offer them the prospect of a better future through independence. And that will be at the heart of the SNP's election campaign in May.
So, William, there's the First Minister there sounding quite upbeat, talking about aspirations, hope and a better future through independence. But thinking about turnout, how important do you think that's going to be in the upcoming elections here in Scotland?
I think it will be important. The turnout in the Scottish election typically runs 8 to 10 percentage points below that of a UK general election. In 2021, there was a record turnout of 63.5%, and it says something that the record is 63.5. I know, by the way, Hugh, it's lower in Wales, but you can talk about that in a minute if you like. But that came up from the mid-50s in 2016. So there's an area to fall, and I think it will be quite important that the SNP does try and get the turnout up and get its own core support out, because some of them have in recent years lost heart a little bit. John Swinney is certainly telling a fairly good story there, that he can, a narrative that he can give to them. And I know from my own experience of my colleagues at the Perth Hub who are members of the SNP, that the SNP is working very hard and will be working very hard for the next 4 months to get people to turn out. A slightly bigger problem for the SNP, though, is the disconnect now between SNP support in the polls, which is about 35% or thereabouts, certainly in the constituency vote, and support for independence as a whole, which is up just nudging north of 50%. And that means there's a significant number of people who are not natural SNP supporters anymore, and many of them who will not, under any circumstances, vote for the SNP, but are nevertheless independent supporters. And there is a danger that those people will not turn out because they don't feel they have anywhere to go. Obviously, they've got the Greens to vote for, but a lot of them might not be supporters of the Greens. They've got Alba, but it doesn't seem to be taking off at the moment. And there may be other things out there that may give them the opportunity to vote. But it is a strong possibility that they will not turn out to vote in this election. And that would be bad because that puts things a little bit at risk. It does mean we rely on the core SNP support just to produce a pro-independence majority. I don't think you'll get an SNP majority. That would be highly unlikely. But a pro-independence majority is absolutely necessary going forward if we're going to get anywhere. That would be my concern. Now, I know the polls show that that's what we will get, but it does depend on turnout, and of course it depends on circumstances between now and May, so everything's still to play for. But a good speech by John Swinney, and what you would be hoping to hear from him at this time, I think.
Thank you, William. So, Hugh, has the campaigning started in Wales?
No. Obviously, I think 7th of January is when the actual period starts, so, you know, from things like campaign expenditure. But it hasn't really kicked off. There was a debate last Sunday on Radio Wales with people from all sort of the main parties discussing their policies and their plans for the elections. Reform refused to take part. But ironically, they don't have a sort of a leader or a representative in Wales, so that could explain that. And obviously, they just don't like being scrutinised. But I think from a turnout point of view, it's quite interesting what William was saying. For the first Assembly elections, as it was then, the turnout was just over 46%. But the last Senate elections, 2021, was actually the highest turnout that's been, 47%. And I think, remember that back in 2021, it was the COVID or post-COVID elections. So I think the fact that Mark Drake, for the First Minister, there was a heightened awareness of Welsh Government and devolution because of COVID, and maybe that did drive more engagement. I think this time's going to be interesting is younger voters, because obviously, like Scotland, 16-year-olds are able to vote. And it does look as though young people are getting quite engaged with politics. In Caerphilly, when Plaid Cymru sort of won by a surprisingly large margin, 4,000 odd votes, a lot of that was attributed to young people coming out to vote for the first time. And I think the fact that young people see that their voices have made a difference is going to sort of resonate. So yeah, no, I think it's going to be interesting, but it's how parties engage with, especially younger people. But I think it's going to be interesting times ahead. But I think from a campaign point of view, I think everybody's waiting for reform to actually come out with some policies, because at the moment, they've got nothing from a Welsh perspective. It's all stop the boats.
Thank you, Hugh. Just quickly, what do you think what are the big issues going to be in the campaign in Wales, do you think?
Health is always the biggest one, because obviously it's the biggest chunk of the budget, and it's something that touches on everybody's lives. People who follow me on social media will know of my recent escapades with the Welsh NHS and the amazing treatment I've had from them. So health is one of the issues. Obviously, reform will try and make immigration an issue. So that's one of the things. But health. And just basically cost of living crisis, and if that's the challenge, is how much can a Welsh government actually impact on people's day-to-day lives from a cost of living crisis when it's actually a national and a global issue.
Thank you, Hugh. We're keen to move on to the next item, William, because we want to explain why the studio looks a bit sparse today. But can I just ask you really quickly, just sticking with the elections, do you think there's any chance that the SNP and the Greens might come to some kind of arrangement where maybe the Greens don't stand on list seats, or they kind of carve up seats so that they can maximise that pro-independence majority and not split the vote?
From the list vote perspective, it would be madness for the Greens not to stand in the list, because that's where they get all their MSPs. And if the SNP do well enough in the constituencies, which they could do with the opposition being split, then the SNP will be at a big disadvantage on the list vote. They've never had 0 MSPs elected on the list, but last time they only got 2. So they need to be quite careful about what sort of arrangement they make. I think there is scope for the SNP and the Greens to work together after the election in a way they were doing previously, before Hamza Yousaf had a big bust up with the Greens and the Greens left the government. But in terms of actually trying to get some sort of arrangement before, I don't think so. And I don't think the SNP is particularly interested in walking away from any party election, doing a deal with anybody, because they're very much going to be hitting the both votes SNP button. And from the point of view of getting the maximum possible number of SNP MPs elected, that's the correct strategy. From the point of view of getting the biggest number of pro-independence MSPs elected, that's a much more difficult question.
Okay, thank you. So, breaking news here at Broadcasting Scotland. Tomorrow we're going to get the keys to our new studio. There's been a big flit to Stirling underway, and that is why our studio is looking a wee bit sparse this afternoon, in case you were wondering. There's still a lot of work to do to fit out the new studio in Stirling, but if we can raise the funding to complete the move, we will be broadcasting regularly from there by the end of this month. So we've got a video to show you what the place looks like. So it'll be sad to leave Cowcaddens. You know, it's like I love the place dearly. But William, what do you think of the new studio?
Well, I've only just seen the outside of it, like you just have. I was wondering which of these august buildings in Stirling it was going to be in, but it became clear towards the end. I think it's a good move. It's close to Stirling University, and I think Broadcasting Scotland will be hoping to get some volunteers from there to run programmes in addition to the current roster of volunteers. Because one of the things about Broadcasting Scotland in recent weeks has been that it's been quite difficult to put on shows, and right now we're down to the Sunday show on a weekly basis and not a great deal more. And it would be great to expand back out again, and that's what part of this is about. So I'm looking forward to that. I think I'm maybe getting a chance to visit Stirling tomorrow to look at the inside of the studio, so that will be interesting. Yes, I hope the venture goes well, and fingers crossed.
Thank you, William. And we'll be closer to your neck of the woods. So does that mean we might see you live in the studio a bit more often?
The public transport doesn't quite work that way, unfortunately, so you might have to rely on the excellent internet, nevertheless.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes. Hugh, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important is sort of moving out from the main centres of media, because there is this obsession. You know, in Cardiff, it's very Cardiff. In Wales, it's very Cardiff focused. You know, in Scotland, you've got Edinburgh and Glasgow. So I think having sort of broadcast facilities and content being produced from different places within countries is really, really important. And that's something with Talking Wales. You know, we're looking at setting up our first sort of community newsroom in Port Talbot, as opposed to somewhere like Cardiff or Swansea or Wrexham.
Well, good luck with your Talking Wales project as well. I hope that...
We launched on Monday, 5th of January. So if you visit talking.wales, you can see our website and listen to some podcasts that explain what's going on in Welsh politics. So it might be a help to people in Scotland to get an idea of what's going on in Wales and how government works here.
And maybe we can collaborate more.
Yep, definitely.
That's great. Well, that is it for this week's Full Scottish, but before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. That's you. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you could afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please just donate whatever you can afford. So thank you to our guests, to Hugh Marshall and to William Duguid for joining us again.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to see you for the last time in Glasgow.
Yes, maybe. And goodbye, and thank you to you at home for watching. Goodbye. Finished a wee bit early, but maybe...